Have you ever experienced a halftime speech? I don't know if any of you play sports, like in high school or anything like that. It doesn't really matter what sport you played. Usually at the halfway mark of the game, the coach will want to give some kind of encouraging, inspirational talk, right, to fire up the team for the second half. I think I've mentioned a few times from this pulpit how terrible my high school football team was. Just absolutely atrocious. And I barely played, so that tells you how good I was. I think we won 2 games in 3 years. So we didn't get inspirational talks, right? We didn't get inspiration at halftime. We got yelling and cursing and verbal insults. That was kind of our coaches sort of letting loose, right, at halftime, because the game was already lost. Usually by the end of the first quarter, if we had any points, right, the point difference between us and the opposing team was insurmountable at that point. So there was really no point of inspiration. But often for normal teams, right, coaches will give a halftime speech, usually after a very poor start to the game. Now the transfiguration of Jesus takes place approximately halfway through the Gospel of Mark, if you notice. It's in chapter 9. And the first half has not gone particularly well for the disciples, especially the immediate chapter preceding chapter 9, chapter 8. In chapter 8, we see this, that Jesus explains to his disciples that he must suffer and die. Now, that's not part of the script if your reason for following Jesus is political glory for Israel and this kind of nationalistic violence toward Rome, right? For this vengeance toward Rome. But your teacher and your brother and your friend and your rabbi dying at the hands of Gentile pagans would be pretty impractical. Right? Doesn't seem to make much sense. So that's bad news, right, for the disciples. And then you'll remember, immediately after that, Peter hears this and he gets in Jesus' face. And he says, "Over my dead body, Jesus, you are not going to die." Right? And Jesus calls him Satan, which is bad. That's not good. And he reminds Peter where his proper place is, and that's immediately behind Jesus. He says, "Get behind me," as a follower rather than a director. Right after this, Jesus leads Peter, James, and John up a mountain at halftime. Just imagine this as a halftime speech. This is a different kind of halftime speech. And he reminds them, like any skilled coach, he reminds them who they are, and he reminds them who he is for them. This is a great reminder. In verse 2, Mark says that Jesus was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. See, this is Jesus' halftime speech to a flawed and broken and poor people. Right? These poor men were very, very poorly performing at this point. And if you're familiar with Exodus, like the disciples clearly were, you know that there's only one person who radiates blinding light. Now, we just heard it in one of the first readings, that Moses' face is shining. Now, that's a reflection of spending time with God, so you might imagine what God looks like at that point. Blinding light in the mountain. They know that there's only one who shines like the sun on the top of the mountain. It's not Moses, it's God. This is God. This man is Yahweh among us. And this moment is a defining wake-up call for Peter, James, and John. On this mountain, God reminds his disciples of 2 realities that we're going to look at really briefly. 2 facts. And as disciples ourselves, we need to hear these facts. We need to get these in us. So first, we can't keep it all for ourselves. And second, we can't add anything to Jesus. We can't keep it all for ourselves. And we can't add anything to Jesus. So first, we can't keep it all for ourselves. What do I mean by this? Notice Peter's reaction when Jesus is transformed. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And I love verse 6, when it says, he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Have you ever tried to fill an uncomfortable silence? What an awkward moment when Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is shining like the sun. And Peter gives them his opinion on what they should do. Now this tells me at least this, that this is eyewitness reportage. This is an eyewitness account, because if you're inventing this, you would not have one of the most prominent disciples act so weird and say something so strange and incomprehensible at this point. Right? You just wouldn't do it. You wouldn't embarrass a prominent disciple like that. He would have said something very wise, but he's human. He's also human. So he tries to fill the silence. He's petrified. This Peter is. And in his terror and in his discomfort, he does one thing. He tries to hoard and hide the glory. He tries to keep it for himself and for the other disciples. He wants to stay there on the mountain. He wants to camp there with Jesus. He's kind of telling Jesus, this is good. But listen, I'll make some tents. We're going to stay up here. We'll be the saintly 6. Right? Just us. No one else. We're going to sit here in our little bubble away from all the sinners down there. We're just going to stay here. And that voice that makes worlds breaks into the moment. They hear that voice. And the disciples, it'll say in Matthew, the disciples fall flat on their faces. Because if there's one thing that's consistent about hearing the voice of God, it's that you hit the floor. It just blows people over. And the glorious light of God's linebackers, if you will, smash into the disciples. They're face down on the ground, and the voice says this is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Listen to him. And this means, of course, that Jesus is not some personal assistant or private secretary that we can utilize to prove our moral superiority over others. He's not an assistant. He's not a secretary. God says, this is my unique, one-of-a-kind, blood-of-my-blood Son. This is my Son. He's not a commodity that you keep for your own interest. He is my joy. He is my beloved. He is my delight. And God is basically saying, all of my pride and love as a father is on him and with him. And he is my gift to the poor and the hopeless and the brokenhearted. This Jesus is my gift to the world. See, what Peter is doing here, this is what some scholars will know, what he's doing here is he's trying to kind of ritualize this moment. He's trying to, all of this glory and this mystery is just blasting him, and he's trying to domesticate it. He wants to keep it a little more controllable. He wants to pack it in a little neat little box that he can handle. Right? He just wants to keep it there for himself. And his voice from the Father is telling him, you can't make the mystery of my Son safe. You can't make Jesus safe. You can't domesticate him. You can't keep his glory for all of your own comfort. At the bottom of this mountain is a people who don't know their right hand from their left. A world gone mad who needs the healing mystery of my Son. Now remember, Jesus does tell him to stay silent until he's raised. There's a number of reasons for that, which we won't get into tonight. It's another sermon. But he is meant to share it after he's raised. Now, I love Lutheran liturgy. Right? The discipline of kind of moving through these different parts of the worship service, confession, forgiveness, word, sacrament, but really this means nothing if we think it's everything. Because it's not everything. God help us if we do not taste the astounding, beautiful mystery of Jesus for ourselves in our own life. See, that's where it all begins. Tasting that mystery, seeing that mystery of Jesus, that's what makes a liturgy soar. That's what makes worship so hard. Not these words themselves and these practices themselves. Otherwise, it might just be a lot of boredom. Lutheran liturgies can be pretty boring. It's hard as a pastor to say that, right? But just ask a child. They don't really know what we're doing here most of the time, do they? Right? And I remember as a kid, I grew up in a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod. My mom still is a devout Christian. She would have to bribe me to get me to church on Thursday nights. Literally bribe me with Dairy Queen afterward. So that's what I did. I would go because I got Dairy Queen, because I had no idea what the heck was going on. And I would bring coloring books, and I would color the whole time. And I just had no idea. And I remember thinking, I am never going to be a pastor. It's like the weirdest thing ever. What are we doing here? Right? I remember thinking that as a kid. Now see, it wasn't Lutheran liturgy that drew me to Jesus. It was an experience over about 6 or 7 years of meeting this living Christ and blowing my life apart. And that's why I'm here. See, we can't box in that mystery. It's going to touch us and hit us in different ways. When Peter's trying to box it in, he's trying to make it neat, he's trying to make it manageable. If we have encountered him, let's not hoard it for ourselves. Let's not hoard it for our own comfort. The world needs it. The world needs him. God is telling Peter, you can't just camp up here and keep it all for yourselves. My son is bringing life for the world. Absolute life for the world. It's for you and every broken-hearted sinner on this planet. So receive the mystery. Be astounded by it. Be delighted by it. And then let that delight drive you down the mountain to a people that needs it. Right? We can't keep it for ourselves. How could we? But that's not all the voice says. He also says this. He says, listen to him. Listen to Jesus. And this brings us to my second point. Second fact we need to hear is you can't add anything to Jesus. We can't add anything to Jesus. Mark tells us this in verse 8. He says, suddenly when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. They wake up from being crushed by the light and they see only Jesus. I just want to reflect on this really briefly. Only Jesus. He is forgiveness in the flesh. He is hope for the hopeless. He is the meaning of life for those who are the walking dead among us. Right? He is grace enfleshed. He is fully and completely and absolutely God, and he is fully embraceable, approachable, identifiable, huggable man. Now, I never thought I would describe Jesus as huggable. Right? But if he had a body, which he did, he was huggable. You could give him a hug. You could touch him. You could see him. And you could hear the tone of his voice. Grace in the flesh. Elijah and the prophets can't be that for us. They can't be grace for us. Moses and the law can't be grace for us. Only Jesus. Only this Jesus. Love him and you're loving all of God. Invite him into your broken heart if it's broken, and you're inviting all of God. There's nothing left. It's all of him. Only Jesus. He is the one who is the justification for our lives. No one else. Right? We sure as heck try to justify our lives, don't we? By being good citizens and good parents and good friends and good employees. But really, at the core of what we need is only Jesus. Only Jesus. He's the only one left standing when our lives come to an end. See, his are the hands we fall into when we breathe our last. And thank God for it. The hands that we fall into at the end are human hands. He knows what it's like to be human. He's the only one that came for us. He didn't wait for us to come to him. He tore apart hell to get to us. He subverted sin to get to us. He demolished the devil Don't try to add anything to them. You don't need it. There's a pastor I used to listen to a lot. He said, Jesus plus nothing equals everything. He's all we need. You fall in love with him, and that gives you a love for people. Really, a love that can withstand anything. Fall in love with him, that gives you a love for the broken among you. And a love for yourself. This is why God gave us a person to see and to know and to touch. And we are the body of Christ. God gave us a person rather than a philosophy or a moral code. We add nothing to him. We add nothing to him. What freedom is that? It's amazing. So this moment, seeing Jesus in glory, this is their halftime speech. They follow this Jesus down the mountain, and the first thing that Jesus does is heal a child of a demon. Right? This is God's heart. This is God's heart. This is the disciples' wake-up call. There's a film that I watched in the gray muckiness of the pandemic somewhere in the summer. I watched a movie. At probably some weird time of day, because what else is there to do? But it's called Paddleton. And it stars Ray Romano and Mark Duplass. And Ray Romano plays a guy named Andy. And Andy's best friend, Michael, has a terminal illness. So Michael's dying. And Andy is telling Michael throughout the movie that he is writing the world's greatest halftime speech. He's been writing this for years. Right? So this is Ray Romano's halftime speech. This is Andy's halftime speech to Michael. He's in the scene, he's practicing it in the mirror. And he says this, gather around, guys. You might imagine a high school football locker room. Right? Gather around, guys. Gather around. Take a knee. Listen, everybody take a knee. Do me a favor, guys. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. I want you to picture something. And he says, we're going to lose this game. We're going to lose this game. I'm not going to lie to you. That's a better team out there. The momentum is shifted. I'm not going to lie to you guys. No matter what I say here, that ain't going to turn it around. We're going to lose this game. But so what? So what? I'm proud of you. Listen, I'm proud of you. You don't need this game. Right? I don't want to wait till the end when you're hurting. But you don't need this game. You're going to have good lives. You're all good guys. You're going to do something with your life. Murphy, you're going to be in the Navy, right? You're going to be a hero someday. Johnson, you're going to be a writer. You're going to live in Connecticut on the water. You're going to have good lives. It's going to be okay. But maybe, just maybe, you're going to have a little empty feeling in your gut. And maybe when you lay in bed at night, secretly, you're going to think, you know what, if I could go back, my life is good, but if I could go back, I would go to the day we lost that big game, and I would play that second half over again. And then Romano says this, well, guess what, guys? Open your eyes. You're back. You're back. In the words of Bon Jovi, your life is now. Here we are in all of our brokenness, in all of our confusion at times. There is a love for us that we've longed for all of our lives. It's right here. It's right here in this Jesus. The love of Jesus for you and for me. You know how he could give this halftime speech in a way, this blinding light halftime speech? It's because he decided from day one that he was going to be God with us and for us. Through hell and high water. He was going to be God with us forever. He embraced our guilt and our shame and our failures and our sin. He became sin to make us sinners beautiful in the eyes of God. What gift is that? What kind of love is that? It's unstoppable love. Right now, we can play the game over. We can start new right now by falling in love with Jesus, by getting to know his heart. We can start new, but only with Jesus. We can't keep it all to ourselves, and we can't add anything to him, and that's freedom. That's joy. That's hope. I found the blessed hope divine in Jesus. 'Tis a day star ever shining bright. It fills my earthly way with heavenly glory and turns like darkness into light. See, life is transformed. Life can start again. It actually means something. It's not just one exhausting day bleeding into another. Fall in love with him and follow his light down the mountain to the rest of the world. You have nothing to prove and you have nothing to earn. He did everything. He did it all for us. And when that gets into your heart, you can't wait for the second half to begin. Right? You can't wait. Life is new again when he is the only one. Amen.